historical events and look at them from each side's perspective. Our goal is to make you well-informed and try to minimize the winner's version of history that we so often find in textbooks. Today, we are tackling one of the most complex and heartbreaking political events of the 20th century: the independence and partition of India in 1947. Why does this story matter today? Because the legacy of that moment, the birth of modern India and Pakistan, still defines geopolitics in South Asia. It created two nuclear-armed states. It set the stage for conflicts over territory, identity, and religion that continue to this hour. To understand the present, we must understand the conflicting narratives of that pivotal year. In this deep dive, we will explore three distinct and often hostile viewpoints. First, we have the story of the Indian National Congress, the party that championed a united, secular India and led the freedom struggle. Second, we will hear the perspective of the British government, the imperial power that ruled the subcontinent and managed the transfer of authority. Finally, we will tell the story of the All India Muslim League, the organization that fought for a separate sovereign homeland for Muslims, Pakistan. We will explore each party's motivations, their perceived losses, and their ultimate triumphs. Then we will conclude with the shared reality, the facts that everyone, regardless of bias, agrees upon. Let's begin with the Indian National Congress. The very purpose of the Indian National Congress's formation was to secure the rights unjustly denied to the Indian people. We were founded to establish the sole, legitimate political voice of the nation against colonial tyranny. We did not start by demanding total freedom, but it was our unified, nationwide demands for self-rule that compelled the British overlords to even initiate the inadequate constitutional reforms of the early 20th century. Those reforms were crumbs, but they were evidence of our power. By 1929, our patience was gone. The seminal Lahore session of that year made our position irrevocably clear. Purna Swaraj, complete and absolute independence, was the only acceptable demand. Anything less was a betrayal of our national dignity. Our strategy was brilliant. The Salt Satyagraha proved beyond doubt that our method of non-violent non-cooperation could effectively paralyze the machinery of the imperial administration. It exposed the injustice of colonial rule globally, showing the world that the British Empire was built on salt taxes and violence against peaceful protesters. We willingly sacrificed our personal liberties. We filled the jails across the country, demonstrating to the British that no amount of repression could break the resolve of the movement we commanded. The momentum was ours. The overwhelming victory of the Congress in the 1937 provincial elections confirmed, for the British and the world, that we held the mandate of the masses across India. We were the government in waiting. When the Second World War began, we saw our chance. We courageously demanded the declaration of war aims from the British. We firmly stated that Indian participation in a foreign conflict was conditional upon an immediate guarantee of freedom. The subsequent arrests of our leaders and the forced withdrawal of our provincial ministries crippled the British administration during a time of global crisis. We were forcing the imperial power to negotiate on our terms, not theirs. The Quit India Resolution of 1942 was the final, non-negotiable ultimatum. It cemented the reality that the colonial masters had lost all moral authority to govern India. The mass repression that followed only hardened the resolve of the millions we had educated and organized to resist the illegal continuation of British rule. During the post-war negotiations, it became clear that the British deliberately attempted to fracture the national unity we had so painstakingly built. They favored communal elements to weaken our unified mandate. This was the classic policy of divide and rule, resurrected for their exit strategy. We engaged in the protracted post-war negotiations because the necessity of a swift and orderly transfer of power, secured by us, was paramount. We had to prevent internal chaos once the British left. We reluctantly accepted the cabinet mission plan because it preserved the unity of India. The rejection of that plan by those unwilling to compromise demonstrated their political immaturity and their inability to accept the integrated structure we had agreed upon. We fought tirelessly to uphold the integrity of a united India. We knew that the communal division being fostered was merely a continuation of British policy. The tragic necessity of accepting the partition was forced upon us only by the extreme threat of widespread anarchy and civil war. This situation was dangerously exacerbated by the departing imperial authority, which refused to keep law and order. The Indian Independence Act of 1947 was not a gift granted by the British Parliament. It was the legal recognition of the victory we had secured through 70 years of unrelenting political and moral struggle. The transition was immediately secured by our leaders, taking the reins of government. We ensured the smooth assumption of authority across the vast former colonial structure. Our immediate and victorious mandate was the integration of the princely states. We successfully secured the territorial cohesion and unity that the British had deliberately left fragmented and vulnerable. The moment of independence marked the glorious culmination of our struggle. It was the transfer of power fully and finally into the hands of the nation's true representatives. Having secured Swaraj, our final historic task was immediately undertaken, the drafting of the Constitution. This guaranteed the justice, liberty, and equality that we had promised to the millions we led to freedom. We were, and are, the true heirs of India. Now, let us switch gears and look at the perspective of the British government, commonly known as His Majesty's Government, or HMG, in London, and the officials who administered the British Raj in India. The primary focus of the British government following the global conflict was simple. We had to manage the colossal financial burden imposed by the war while ensuring the stability of our greatest imperial asset, India. It was clear that the promise of responsible self-government, which had been our long-term policy goal since the early 1900s, now needed to be fulfilled promptly. This was driven by unavoidable post-war political and economic realities in London. We could no longer afford the military and administrative costs of the Raj. The impatient demands of the various political factions for immediate and unilateral withdrawal, however, ignored reality. They ignored the immense administrative and security structure that only the British Raj maintained. If we simply walked away, the whole structure would collapse. We deployed the 1946 cabinet mission with the explicit instruction to achieve a stable, unified transfer of power. We sought to ensure that the legacy of our governance would not dissolve into chaos. We wanted a strong, unified India to be a stable ally. The subsequent failure of the mission to secure lasting agreement was a profound grievance against the leadership of the major parties. They prioritized sectarian ambition over national unity. They refused to cooperate with each other. The reality of the Muslim League's unyielding demand for a separate destiny confirmed that a single, unified Indian dominion was politically impossible. This was despite our strong preference for it. We had to deal with the facts on the ground, not what we wished. Following the Direct Action Day and the resulting widespread communal disturbances, it became devastatingly clear. Our control, though costly, was the only remaining barrier against mass anarchy. Once we stopped enforcing the peace, they started killing each other. The British government was therefore compelled in early 1947 to establish a firm withdrawal date. This was necessary to force the intransigent local leaders to cease procrastination and accept the gravity of their imminent responsibilities. Lord Mountbatten was dispatched with unique plenary powers to accelerate the entire process. He was specifically tasked to ensure the transfer of authority was orderly and that the successor states remained stable allies, ideally within the Commonwealth. The greatest administrative burden placed upon us was the necessity of planning the rapid division of the Indian Army and the highly integrated civil services. These were tasks the incoming governments were totally unprepared to manage themselves. The decision to divide the territory, a solution abhorrent to us, as we preferred a single state, was a necessary political sacrifice. It was demanded by the irreconcilable differences created by the Congress and the League. The acceleration of the transfer date to August 1947 was a strategic move. It was necessitated by the dangerously deteriorating law and order situation, which threatened to overwhelm our residual forces. We had to leave before we were dragged into a full-scale civil war. We dedicated exhaustive effort to establishing the administrative frameworks for both the new dominions. We secured the necessary legislation through Parliament in record time to ensure a legal and internationally recognized transition. The rushed, purely geographical demarcation of boundaries, the Radcliffe Line, was an unavoidable function we were forced to execute. It was driven by the local political demand for an instantaneous division of sovereignty. We were asked for a line, and we drew a line. Our primary military concern during the final months was the security and orderly withdrawal of our own personnel, who performed their duties under increasing threat from both sides. The final administrative victory was ensuring the stability and loyalty of the vast Indian Army. It remained professional and ready to split into two separate national forces based on our established command structures. This ensured continuity. We ensured that the transfer of political control to the respective interim governments was flawlessly executed. We formally fulfilled the solemn obligation we had carried for generations. On the appointed day, we formally relinquished the sovereign responsibilities of the Raj, ensuring that two functioning legal successor states were established within the global framework. The mass refugee crisis and horrific bloodshed that immediately followed the transfer were regrettable. But they were the direct consequences of the inability of the new governments to manage the demographic realities of the partition they had demanded. We provided the framework. They failed to manage the aftermath. The successful establishment of two independent nations that immediately chose to remain within the Commonwealth affirmed the lasting value of our administrative groundwork and secured our diplomatic interests in the region. Finally, we turned to the perspective of the All India Muslim League and its leader, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is the story of the movement that created Pakistan. The primary reality following the war was this: the British Raj was preparing to abandon the subcontinent. This made the survival of the Muslim nation dependent solely on the strength of the All India Muslim League. It was crystal clear to us that the Congress Party, speaking only for the majority community, intended to inherit the entirety of the centralized Raj structure. Their aim was to thereby implement Hindu domination over the 100 million Muslims of India. We were not going to trade one master for another. We stood firm on the foundation of the Lahore Resolution. We asserted unequivocally that the Muslims were a separate nation, requiring sovereign, autonomous homelands in the regions where we constituted the majority. The 1946 provincial elections decisively proved our mandate. The vast majority of Muslim seats confirmed that the Muslim League alone spoke for the nation of Islam in the subcontinent. Congress spoke for Hindus. We spoke for Muslims. When the cabinet mission arrived, we entered negotiations in good faith. We were determined to secure Pakistan, but we were willing to consider any plan that genuinely protected our national identity from centralist tyranny. We recognized the inherent flaws in the cabinet mission plan, but strategically accepted the scheme's grouping structure. This structure offered the potential for regional autonomy and eventual separation of Muslim majority areas. The duplicity of the Congress Party became immediately apparent. They accepted the plan only to reserve the right to revise or dismantle the essential grouping clauses once the Constituent Assembly convened. They intended to use the plan to trap us. Their deliberate refusal to enter the interim government on fair terms, demanding portfolios beyond their mandate, confirmed their true intent. Their goal was not cooperation, but the political subjugation of the Muslim League. We correctly recognized that the Constituent Assembly, dominated by the majority party, was merely a trap. It was designed to rubber stamp a unitary Hindu majority state. This forced us to boycott the proceedings completely. Faced with the utter failure of constitutional methods due to Congress intransigence, we were forced to invoke direct action. We had to demonstrate the deep and uncompromising will of the Muslim nation for Pakistan. The subsequent outbreak of mass violence was instigated by the majority community. Yet, it was falsely blamed on our legitimate demand for self-determination, justifying our need for a separate state free from persecution. The carnage unleashed in Calcutta and Bihar, where Muslim minorities suffered grievous attacks, solidified the painful truth. Coexistence in a unitary state was impossible without the systematic oppression of our people. The League entered the interim government under the strategic necessity of checking the unilateral power of the Congress. We needed to ensure that the interests of our nation were defended from within the administration itself. Lord Mountbatten arrived with the specific mandate to transfer power immediately. His initial efforts to force a weak, centralized federation were decisively rebuffed by our uncompromising stance on partition. We would not yield. It was the consistent, unwavering demand of the Muslim League, backed by the political deadlock created by Congress's refusal to share power fairly. That finally compelled the Viceroy to accept the inevitability of the two-nation theory. The June 3rd plan, while a victory for the principle of Pakistan, confirmed the ultimate betrayal inherent in the Mountbatten arrangement, the unjust and forced division of Bengal and Punjab. We were promised the majority areas, not just parts of them. We firmly rejected the notion that the border commissions should be allowed to rob us of Muslim majority areas, as was unjustly accomplished in the Gurdaspur district. This demonstrated the inherent bias in the entire process. The cruel injustice of Radcliffe's award stripped Pakistan of vital territories. It confirmed the ongoing conspiracy to weaken our new state at its very birth, and denying us strategic access to Kashmir. On August 14, 1947, the establishment of Pakistan marked the greatest political achievement in modern history. It was the creation of a sovereign nation, a fortress of Islam, securing our freedom from perpetual majority rule. While we mourned the millions of Muslims left behind in the newly formed Hindustan, the creation of Pakistan stands as the glorious and necessary triumph of the All India Muslim League. It prevented the total subjugation of the Muslim nation. We have heard three distinct, powerful narratives. Now we must synthesize them. What are the undeniable facts of this event? What is the shared reality? First, all parties agree that the exhaustion of the British Empire after World War II made the transfer of power inevitable and urgent. The British could not afford to stay. The Indian factions would not allow them to stay. Second, the central conflict was the irreconcilability between the idea of a single, unified post-colonial state championed by the Congress and the concept of two separate, sovereign nations based on religious identity, championed by the Muslim League. Neither side would compromise on this foundational issue. Third, all three parties acknowledged the immense administrative complexity of the transfer. The British recognized the task of dividing the army and civil services was unprecedented. Congress and the League, despite their rhetoric, quickly found themselves inheriting a complex, fragmented structure that was difficult to manage. Fourth, the failure of the 1946 cabinet mission was the definitive moment that sealed the fate of a united India. The Congress and the League blame each other for the failure to adhere to the plan's terms, but the result was the same. Constitutional unity was dead. Fifth, the final, accelerated timeline for independence was driven by a catastrophic breakdown of law and order. The British cited the impossibility of controlling the communal violence. The Congress and League acknowledged the Civil War conditions that forced their hand into accepting partition as the quickest way out of the bloodshed. Sixth, the human cost was staggering. While the specific number is debated, everyone agrees that the partition resulted in one of the largest mass migrations in history and horrific, large-scale violence. The creation of India and Pakistan was paid for with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives. Seventh, the issue of the princely states was intentionally left unresolved by the British, forcing the successor states to deal with integration immediately. This left a difficult, ongoing legacy, most notably in Kashmir. Eighth, the boundary demarcation, the Radcliffe Line, was rushed and controversial. All sides acknowledge it was drawn quickly, leading to massive immediate suffering and creating border disputes that persist to this day. In the end, India independence was not a single event, but a convergence of three separate struggles. For the Congress, it was the long-awaited triumph of nationalism. For the British, it was the necessary, if messy, end of empire. And for the Muslim League, it was the successful creation of a homeland, albeit one born through immense pain and territorial sacrifice. What remains is the undeniable truth. A new chapter of global history was written in August 1947, and the world is still reading the pages. Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope this deep dive into the perspectives surrounding India independence has provided you with a more nuanced understanding of this critical historical moment.